It begins with words, stories, histories, lessons, the compilation of human knowledge. Before libraries, before scrolls and books, these stories and words of knowledge were shared orally. They were passed down through the generations, being altered, embellished, changed. As Melvin Briggs says in Adventures of English, a written language can cross all boundaries. It brings precision, forces ideas into steady shapes, secures against loss. Written words stimulate the imagination as much as any other external reality, fire, storm, thunder, and yet they can express internal reality, hope, philosophy, mood, in ways which also provoke imagination, engage with that astounding faculty and set it off to make more words, adding to the visible map of the mind. Writing helps us fully to see what it is to be more completely human. So let me tell you a story. It is about the power of words and the foundation of libraries in the Western world. Once upon a time lived a great society where knowledge and education were highly esteemed. This society birthed Western thought and still influences our education system today. And this great society was the Greeks. In Greece lived three wise men, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Each of these philosophers had very strong opinions on rhetoric and the written word versus the oral tradition. Socrates very much disliked the written word. He once told his student Phaedrus, "Writing, Phaedrus, has this strange quality and is very like painting, for the creatures of painting stand like living beings. But if one asks them a question, they preserve a solemn silence. And so it is with written words. You might think they spoke as if they had intelligence, but if you question them, wishing to know about their sayings, they always say only one and the same thing. And every word, when once it is written, is bandied about alike among those who understand and those who have no interest in it, and it knows not to whom to speak or not to speak. When ill-treated or unjustly reviled, it always needs its father to help it, for it has no power to protect or help itself." Socrates disliked texts because you couldn't question the author and more deeply delve into his thought. Written words cannot argue back. Also, the written word took away the ability to know the ethos of the author. When a speaker is presenting, Socrates argues, you can see the truth in what is being said because you know whether the speaker is credible or not. His students deviated from his thoughts on written text, like Plato, who passed on his ideas to his student Aristotle. The art of rhetoric was also taught by many sophists, who backed many of their arguments with and relied heavily on the written word. Therefore, scholars finally came to the conclusion that scholarship on the analysis and synthesis of texts, rather than on verbal argument, was better than the oral tradition. At this time, it was the schools that were made to house many of the scrolls. Later, libraries are where the texts were accumulated, and scholars decided it would be the ideal place to share this information as well. Because of Alexander the Great's empire, Greek culture spread. As the culture spread, its ideas and texts spread as well. This helped the conquered cultures to acclimate to the new culture around them. Also, it inspired the library that was created at Alexandria, which became the hub of culture and learning. The Ptolemies invited scholars to come and live and study at their great library. They also paid large sums of money to buy books and even confiscated books from the merchants, returning only the copies, not the originals, to the owner. This library showed the surrounding area that Egypt and the Greek Empire was more intellectual and refined than they, and so politicians and other rulers supported scholars by providing money and a place to study. Knowledge was power. And the library, it was a sumptuous institution, conceived on a grand scale, and libraries reflected the wealth and ambitions of the Hellenistic empire builders. At the library, scholars wrote commentaries on texts, copied texts, translated the texts, etc. Written texts helped society think beyond what they previously thought. New academic theories and ways to categorize ideas emerged. These scholars also created new technologies to make the library more easily accessible. With the way that they were thinking of new categorization, they made catalogs and indexes to find the books. The use of catalogs and indexes are very similar to how we use them today. We have catalogs, which help us find and locate the information. And at the Library of Alexandria, they would have little tags of metadata attached to their scrolls to figure out what it was about. So the library helped create a technology that we are still using today. And the library itself was kind of a technology. It made the access of information and the application of that knowledge easier. Since libraries are a social tool, it helps shape our self-expression, for shaping personal and public identity, and for cultivating relations with others. Libraries were where knowledge was discovered, stored, and shared. The Library of Alexandria originated this process, and it still impacts our society today. But then, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Oh, wait, no. Wrong story. Then everything changed when the Library of Alexandria burned down. All of those books, all of that knowledge, lost. And what was to happen to the library? People weren't relying on that information quite as much. We were moving away from the library as an establishment. But it was saved, I guess you could say, by the monks, by the church. They would spend their time writing. They would be copying religious texts, the things that they deemed important. And plus, they had to find a pastime that they could devote to God. And at this time, they did record more than just religious texts, but a lot of the time they scraped off and then began anew. With technology today, we can actually recover quite a bit of the text that had been scraped out and then rewritten on by these monks. But it was they who established, I guess you could say, the medieval library. So the church kept the idea of the library alive. But it wasn't until the late Middle Ages that you began to see it outside of the church. So you'll get to see it into personal libraries and school libraries. Now, to have a library in a town, it needs to first have a centralized population, economic development, and political stability. And so that's partly why the Library of Alexandria was burned. There was political instability. The Renaissance found a reemergence of Greek principles. It wanted to be able to share knowledge. They found that really important, whether that be through letters or going to the book. And this was actually greatly helped by the printing press. Books were being more easily produced. The printing press gave us the ability to produce exact copies. Before this, you'd have to write it all out by hand, it's very time consuming. Probably make your hand hurt as well. The printing press gave us the ability to produce more titles, more copies. We got to cover more subjects. While the majority of these books and pamphlets were still mostly religious, there was more secular options as well and academic. There was also the creation of new techniques for the organization of published materials. As collections grew, well, there may now be more in the collection than you can really remember, so you have to have it organized. There was also the stimulation of literacy and education for the general population. Books used to be scarce. Now with the printing press, there's more reading available for those who couldn't afford it before. Now let's speed the story up a bit. In America, libraries were first established as university libraries. But during the Industrial Revolution, the United States began to prosper. People became wealthier and began to have a little more leisure time. Thus, the social library was formed. However, to have access to these libraries, one had to pay a fee. The social library wanted to help people improve themselves and to discuss ideas with fellow knowledge seekers. But again, this could only be done for those that could afford it. Another type of library that is reminiscent of today's public library is the circulating library. This library's purpose wasn't to help people improve themselves, really, but it was there to entertain. It held fiction novels, especially romances. These books were then rented out, or the members of the library were charged a fee, just as in the social library. And notice, libraries have yet to become free. The circulating library did introduce a couple of great services. 1, service to women. Awesome. 2, it provided newspapers and magazines, had extended hours of service. There were reading areas actually in the library, and they had outreach services where they would deliver books to their patrons' houses. Eventually, the idea of these two libraries merged into the public library. Its mission was to serve the public, so they would provide materials that would both enlighten and entertain. The fundamental characteristics of all public libraries are that they are all supported by taxes. They're governed by a board. It's open to all, everyone. No membership fees, nothing. You can all come in. It's voluntary. You don't have to come. We're not going to force you. There's no requirement. It's established by state law. And again, you can provide service free of charge. Libraries began to be seen as a place that you could go to continue your education if you couldn't be in school anymore, if you had to work, or maybe you couldn't afford it. So, in summation, libraries throughout the years reflect the changes society goes through, what we deem as important or entertaining. Through the years, computers, movies, CDs have been added. Different books come and go. How we organize the library, which shelves go where, shifting. What remains is that the library is a place for knowledge. They are a place about literacy and lifelong learning, and they will be around as long as we need both. To remain relevant, libraries just need to remember to serve humanity, respect all forms by which knowledge is communicated, use technology intelligently to enhance service, protect free access to knowledge, and honor the past and create the future. As long as we stay true to education and learning, libraries will remain ever present. They represent our culture's value of education, our value on service, and our value of history. Libraries have survived the ages and will continue to do so. Libraries have adapted through centuries of change, becoming institutions for the common people, not just the intellectually gifted and the privileged. George Mercer Dawson said, "A great library contains the diary of the human race. May the way the diary is provided and maintained change, but may the library continue to be the holder of that diary."